Hello and welcome to a very special YouTube live on NDTV. This week, we are discussing the much alarming a trademark case, rape in Metaverse. Let me take my viewers to the case which happened in the United Kingdom. A 16-year-old girl was sexually attacked in the online Metaverse. Gang rape by online strangers. This is what the New York Post reported. I'm being joined by NS Nappinai, who is a Supreme Court advocate and also a cyber law expert. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. My very first question to you will be, provided this is a trademark case which has happened and it's very new for all of us, how do you think, as a parent, we should protect our children from this threat?
Yeah, very critical question, Shubhangi. Unfortunately, this is not the first of its kind case, also. There have been many instances prior to this, and one of the earliest in the metaverse was in January 2022, when a lady, within 60 seconds of her joining the metaverse and this online game, was sexually assaulted.
Hmm.
So, interestingly, she talks about how people may talk about exiting the game or taking some precautionary measures, and
Hmm.
she says that you just freeze when something like this happens, similar to what happens to you when you are assaulted in the physical realm. So, when we talk about technology and its usage, and particularly by youngsters, the difficulty that most parents or adults have is that we have already divested our authority to the youngster.
Yeah.
You buy a mobile phone at home. Instead of you setting it up, what would you do? You would give it to the child to set it up because you
True.
believe that they will do it faster. So
True.
when you are showing, discomfort with respect to technology, and then you try teaching them how to stay safe whilst using technology, they're not going to listen to you. They'll say, oh, you don't know anything about this technology. You're just getting scared about something that you are unaware of.
That's
So
right.
the way I looked at it, and that's what my non-profit Cybersati espouses also, is that the youngsters have to be the ambassadors for safety. So the way we have been working is that we create awareness amongst the youngsters without it being preachy. You cannot tell them not to go onto online games. You can't tell them don't play or don't do so, don't do that. It's more about when you do, what can you look out for? Kind of create awareness about the threats and also about their remedies. And most importantly, we often forget that a lot of bullying or crimes are committed by children themselves without realizing that they are crimes. You give
Undoubtedly.
fancy taglines and then you forget that it's actually a crime. For instance, in an online game, if people gang up to on somebody, it doesn't have to be as in this case of rape, but if they gang up to create, for instance, to kill one of the avatars, even that has a tagline and that goes by the name of griefing.
Hmm.
So this is how life is evolving in terms of the virtual world. So the way I look at it is, it's really critical for the youngsters to know what the threats and vulnerabilities are, what the law says, and what they can do and they can't do in terms of it becoming a crime. Nobody wants their children to become criminals, and even the children don't want to commit crimes. Sometimes they cross the line without realizing that they are crossing it.
I think, ma'am,
They
that's
go,
yeah, that's a very
sorry, just
important
one.
point.
Yeah, and the
Yeah, you
one
can
last
continue.
line I wanted to mention is they also become victims without realizing what is happening to them.
That's true. That's a very important point that people, and especially the children, become victim of when they don't even know that they're becoming a victim. I would draw attention to the existing cyber law which exists in our country, provided this case is not new, but this is again a very rare case. We are talking about safety in an online world where people of my age or your age, and mostly like all of us spend like 3 to 4 hours online. We're speaking about such critical cases. I would want to ask you, ma'am, how do you think the existing cyber law should be strengthened to maybe combat this or to control this?
One of the most important things is when we talk about something called cyber law. The assumption is that the Information Technology Act of 2000 will
Hmm.
play that role of a singular or single cyber law. But
Yeah.
that's not the case. In my first book, I call it the cyber law jigsaw because
Hmm.
the laws are fragmented and split all over into multiple laws. So
That's
you
right.
have certain provisions under the Information Technology Act, criminal provisions, which can be called upon in cases of these kind of violence, right? So, for instance, 67 of the IT Act deals with obscenity, publishing or transmission of obscene content. Then 67A talks about sexually explicit content and 67B of child pornography. They were meant to deal with a different kind of or set of cases.
Yeah.
But the way law works is the headings are irrelevant. Only the content of the provision matters. So if a particular case falls within that parameter of that section, you can apply it. For
Hmm.
instance, if somebody creates a false identity and then harasses you, you can use 66C, which is, identity theft or cheating by personation in financial frauds, etc. So you have certain provisions under the IT Act, but they are not all. So
Hmm.
where there is no provision in the IT Act, you can still rely on the Indian Penal Code. And under the new code that will be coming into, it has been notified, but it has not yet come into effect, the
Hmm.
Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
will have you have a lot more provisions under the BNS which deal with cybercrime, and it talks specifically about these kind of when I say specifically, I'm not saying it uses words like cyberbullying or cyber stalking, etc., but you do have provisions under it which actually capture cyber crimes also. And
Hmm.
once that comes into effect also, you'll have a lot more succor under law. But
Hmm.
until then, please, this is the message I want to send out to all victims. Please do not think that you don't have remedies. You do have. Look out for it under the Indian Penal Code if none are available visibly under the IT Act.
I think, ma'am, that's where awareness about these laws also come to
Yes.
place. If you're not aware, you will never step up against these things. That's a very important point. Now, I would move to a more personal question. It happened with a 16-year-old in UK. 16-year-old playing a game. Maybe she has never imagined that she would be, exposed to such kind of trauma. Here we're talking about the psychological trauma. I'm not still not talking about that she was physically touched, but psychologically, yes, in every way, and maybe for years. How do you think these girls, and how do you think this the psychological trauma? How can a person, or maybe any age group, be it 16, be 18, or whatever, how we should be careful if if some sort of thing happens to anybody, be it you and me, how should we stop this, or should we not come across this?
Yeah. In fact, I would say there are three levels to it. One is to prevent it. The second
Hmm.
is how do you react when somebody, when you see a victim like
Exactly.
this?
Exactly.
Often the victims don't come forward and talk about it because their assumption is if they go and say, I was assaulted in a game, someone may just laugh at them and say,
Exactly.
what's the big deal? So here is the thing. Now, it also ties into your earlier question about do we need more laws?
Yeah.
I would strongly say that yes, we need, and we need something specific. I'm not saying you must have a law which says rape in the metaverse. But
Hmm.
as I told you earlier, a provision which can capture offenses online or in the virtual mode or in the digital domain are very critical. I'll
Hmm.
just step back a bit to explain why. You mentioned about the psychological angle. Effectively, it can even have a physiological
That's true.
impact. Often we don't realize that there is a physiological problem too when it's virtual. There were about 4 or 5 cases that were initially decided by the lower courts in the US, which
Hmm.
dealt with child sexual abuse material, and the courts acquitted the accused by saying it's a victimless crime because it was in the digital domain. The
Yeah.
courts didn't realize just because somebody is not physically touching a child, not abusing a child in person, it doesn't mean that they're not victims. They are very much victims. Then the US appeals court had to step in to correct it and say that sorry, it is not a victimless crime. they are very much victims and they are very much affected, even though this harm is happening in the digital domain. That applies to cases like this 16-year-olds. And as you rightly said, age is not an issue, but
Yeah,
more so when it is a child, it becomes critical. So
exactly. Because yeah.
here is where law needs to step in, and also the people. That's why I called it cyber sati, because
Mm,
each one of us around the other person has to be the friend who will guide and guide correctly,
exactly.
right? So when
Yeah.
you're going onto the digital domain, what are the protective measures that you can take? For instance, because of the 2022 incident, platforms have introduced this the barrier concept.
Hmm,
So we
hmm,
also
hmm.
introduced this no lower half, so you have an avatar which only has an upper half.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, that's where the technology also adds to physiological harm. When you have on a haptic suit, for instance, you can actually feel whatever is happening in the virtual world. So if you're molested in the virtual world, despite the fact that the avatar may be just half an avatar, you're still being molested physically.
exactly.
So when everyone needs to know what is happening, what are the harms, and law has to evolve to meet these kind of requirements. But until then, how can you protect yourself? If you're using technology, you have to do it knowing what harms it can cause also. You have to be trained, like the good touch, bad touch. We
Yeah,
cannot stop victims falling prey to good touch, bad touch, but we can and we do nowadays teach kids, very young kids, who may not even know technically what good touch or bad touch is about, but they understand conceptually what you're telling them, that if this happens, come and tell me. So
exactly.
similarly, we have to start, befriending the children around us and telling them, look, this is good touch, this is bad touch, this is a good incident, this is a bad incident online. If something happens to you online, also it is a crime. So please come and let me know. And even if they don't come and tell you, you can
Hmm,
see the change in their behavior. Speak
hmm,
to them then, and don't start off by saying, why did you go onto the game? That's as good as closing the lid on them sharing with you. You know, so don't blame the victim, be their friend and draw it out and take remedial action. Today, the platforms also, the minute you report about bad behavior online, action is taken against users. Now, law is evolving to also find out originator details
hmm,
in terms
hmm.
of who is the person who has that avatar, etc. And if it is a game which is linked to a social media platform, you must have done a two-factor authentication there for you to even start the platform. And therefore,
Exactly.
the connection between the avatar to the person behind it is easy to trace. And that's why I said it's important for children also to know that criminals can be tracked online.
Hmm,
There are
hmm,
remedies, and
hmm,
the criminals need to know they can be tracked and they better beware. This is
hmm.
not a domain where they can get away with this kind of conduct and think that they are safe. And
True.
law therefore needs to step in to show. And that's the reason I'm really happy that UK went the extra mile, irrespective of the hurdles they are going to face, in filing the complaint, in registering the complaint, initiating investigation. One case like this, where they show that the criminals are traced and brought to book, will put a lot of them, you will put the warning out to them to
Yeah.
beware in case they think about committing such
And
crimes.
just like a very important point, I was actually going to ask you the same question, a subsequent question to this. This has happened in UK, and UK has done its course. I mean, it is ready to take action against it. How do you think in a country like India, where there's a backlog of rape cases, how do you think we as a country, where most of the people and most of the children are unaware about this metaverse and an online threat, and with this case, how do you think we as a country should become more responsible when it comes to online content?
For us, we have already taken a lot of steps to try and create safer domains through the
Hmm.
intermediary guidelines.
Yeah.
So a lot of onus is put on the platforms on how they have to evolve responsible technology.
Hmm.
But these guidelines have to be implemented in keeping with these kind of evolving crimes, without having to say, oh, let me run back and make some amendments to the rules also. We have to see how. rules can be framed in a dynamic way. And I personally feel the intermediary guidelines as it stands today will apply to cases like this also. So it is very much open to the government and law enforcement agencies to reach out to platforms to figure out in advance before cases like this. Please don't assume cases like this would not have happened in India. Probably they've happened and people have not come forward
Yeah,
with
it is
it.
just not come to a light. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So
simple.
government has to now step forward to make sure that in case something like this comes up, what do they do? Start putting in place standard operating procedures. They also need to evolve whether they have to have engagement with the social media platforms to see
Hmm.
whether any further protective measures can be put in place to prevent these kind of
Hmm.
situations. For instance, just making the distance parameter, that barrier, the norm.
Hmm.
Today, what it is there, probably, if I'm not mistaken, is you have to choose it as a security measure.
Yes,
Why don't
yes.
you make that the default?
Mandatory.
If
Yeah.
somebody wants proximity, let them remove that. See, the reason I'm saying it is when children are using, they don't go and read terms and conditions. They don't go and check what all they are supposed to do and not do, right? Telling them don't create a girl avatar, create a male avatar is totally wrong. Again, we are getting sexist online also then,
That's true.
right? So why don't you just think about it, right? A simple solution would be make that the default option and let the adults choose when they will remove the barrier. Similarly, when you're talking about parental consent, because from age 13 to 18, you still need parental consent.
Hmm.
And broadly, most social media platforms allow for 13-year-olds to come on the thing platform. So start relooking your parental consent processes. A mobile number OTP obviously hasn't worked. So, those kind of things. Again, the same thing I told you earlier, where the parent is going to give their mobile, it works on trust. You're not going to ask the child, why are you asking for my mobile? Are you
Hmm.
going to use it to circumvent a parental consent process? Is not how a parent will think. So, if an OTP comes into their mobile and that is being used by the child himself or herself, then that needs to be looked into as an alternative in terms of what other means of parental control can you bring in, right? So
I
there
think,
are
yeah.
a lot of simple solutions that can be looked at the platform level. We can't expect people to keep running to court or to the police all the time. But God forbid if that kind of a situation comes up, I truly hope that we also will not make statements like, when physical rape cases are there, how can you ask us to take up virtual rape? And I hope we will understand that the impact or the harm is the same, and we will set an example by taking up those cases for prosecution and show the world that we can succeed in those prosecutions
Yes,
also.
ma'am. Surely, I think that's very important. I think that is where we draw a line that a rape is a rape, be it in metaverse or in real life. I think the three big takeaways which I take from this life and from you is: one, we need to be more responsible when it comes to online content. Second, be a friend rather than being a questionable friend or a parent. And I third thing, I feel like our laws, existing laws, need to be more strengthened to take swift action. Thank you so much for joining us and decoding for our viewers what should be done. Thank you so much for making our time, ma'am.
Thank you so much for
Really
having me.
appreciate. Really appreciate. Thank you.